Okay, perfect. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Neil Baunsgard. My pronouns are he, him, and welcome to our September Power Hour from the Environmental Center. Looking at the list of people here, and I recognize a lot of names, but not all of you. So if any of you, if this is your first time interacting with the Environmental Center, welcome. We in normal times are physically located right in downtown Bend on Kansas Avenue by the library and McMinimans. And we at the Environmental Center do a lot of roles of trying to embed sustainability into daily life here in Central Oregon. And the Energy Challenge program of that is really focused on the intersection of energy, climate, and transportation. And when you say those three buzzwords, that is what we're talking about today, and a lot of the work that I am lucky enough to be able to do here at the Environmental Center. So today's going to be a little bit of an open book. We are going to go over a lot of topics, and I'll basically just try to address some of the questions that I hear most often when I interact with the public talking about electric vehicles. And then we'll have an opportunity at the end of that to ask whatever specific questions you might have about charging, where to go, batteries, all of those topics. So the main questions that we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about cost savings. We're going to talk about incentives. We'll talk a little bit about solar and some frequently asked questions, and then we'll move on from there. So let's start with a little bit of an exercise. And I think let's start with a little bit of an exercise. I can't see any of your faces, but go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you to imagine what an electric vehicle is. Okay, you can go ahead and open your eyes. And I'll say that oftentimes, or kind of early on in our work around electric vehicles, what people first saw when they closed their eyes was something like the image that's here on my left. So at first, it was this theoretical idea of a concept car of the future, and it really wasn't something that people were kind of seeing in their day-to-day lives. And where we've kind of shifted in a lot of people's minds, the next image that comes to mind is a really advanced and expensive luxury car like this Tesla Model X on the right. But this is what a lot of people expect, but what we want to make sure that we are recognizing is that there's a lot of electric vehicles on the road and you just don't see it. So these are two other examples of electric vehicles that are on the road here in Central Oregon. On the left, this is a used Nissan Leaf with Amy Mitchell, who's a teacher, adventurer, there with a canoe being a very practical car. And then this is also another electric vehicle. This is the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid minivan. So I'm going to go ahead and open a poll. We're going to start with a who are you poll. So if you are tuned in on your computer and are able to answer the questions on the poll, I'll kind of read them out loud as folks are answering. The first question on there is, where are you in the electric vehicle journey? So I have an answer of an EV skeptic, EV curious, looking to buy an EV, or already have an electric car, something other. How many cars does your household currently have? 0, 1, 2, 3, or more. And the third question, I don't think I put the question in there. So whatever you answer to that is great. So it looks like we have, oh wow, everyone is wrapping up. Okay, perfect. So let's see, gonna publish the results. So you might be able to see these. So it looks like we have a little over half of you are in the EV curious phase. We have one current EV driver, and then about a third of you are interested in the market for an EV. We have about half of people with a one-car household, a third of people with two-car household, and a little bit less than that for three or more. And then great participation in the made-up question at the end. So perfect there. Okay, one more poll. This one's a little bit of a quiz poll, so no cheating. This next question is, how much does an average American pay for gas each year? And this is anonymous, so you can guess. All right, that's most of you. So the correct answer to this is $9,000, which is a lot of money, and I think a lot of people don't recognize how much they cumulatively spend on their vehicles, and that is why people tend to shift towards a less efficient vehicle than they might otherwise have chosen. So this is yeah, and every day that we see people driving electric cars, they're learning that electric is just better. So we can go into a lot of different numbers, and I'm happy to work through them with anybody individually, but this is kind of the general gist of it. For an average American driver, driving an electric car is going to be about $30 a month, and driving a gas car is going to be about $100 a month, or sorry, $120 a month. There are also other significant cost benefits, because although electricity isn't free, it's much less expensive and much more consistently priced than the cost of gas. Maintenance costs are also significantly less, with so many less moving parts. There's no oil changes. There's no, well, I'll give a concrete example. The Environmental Center's had its Nissan Leaf since 2017. And the maintenance that we've done is putting on snow tires and replacing the windshield wiper fluid. So that's another real advantage that a lot of folks don't consider when they're first looking into an electric car. But one of the other things that people often ask or retort is, what about the battery? These are really important questions to ask. And the good news is, a lot of people might ask the question of what happens when the battery dies. So the good news is that we've had commercially available or publicly available mass-produced electric vehicles on the market for over a decade. So these were the same concerns that people had when the first standard hybrids, like Toyota Prius, came out. People were really concerned about the battery, and then over time, people were driving those cars. We got some data from those cars, and we were able to establish, yeah, on rare occasion, people do have problems with the battery, but for the majority of drivers, that battery is going to last the life of the car. So there's this really great resource that we'll include in the follow-up, and it is a data visualization where you can go in and select the vehicle that you're interested in, the year that it was produced, and it'll show you the data on the average battery like state of health reduction. So this is the average of all vehicles that they had data for the first 6 years of their life. And so from here, you can tell that electric vehicle batteries don't just run and then die, seemingly like cell phone batteries do. They really will slowly degrade over time, but still maintain most of their charge for their entire life. So in here, these are kind of first-gen electric vehicles and first-generation batteries. And even with those, you're seeing about a 10% reduction in range in the first 5 years of ownership. The more modern battery packs are doing significantly better than that. But that's still only saying if you have a 200-mile range car, that you're going to have a 180-mile range car. So it's not like the car becomes all of a sudden unusable. It just has a slightly shorter range. So there's another thing to consider here too, and that's that especially some of the earlier generation vehicles like the earlier Nissan Leafs that we drive at the Environmental Center, that reduction in range, if it might have lost 10% or been one of the unlucky few that lost 20% of its battery, that might get to a range that's no longer super functional for your needs. And what we've been able to see since the Leaf has been out for so long is that battery technology has just improved a ton over the last decade. And let's switch to the next slide. In the next, see if it can switch for me. So this is a picture of what the battery pack looks like for a Nissan Leaf. And this sits under the seats on the bottom chassis of the car. And this same battery pack, which was available in from around 2010 until 2017, had a functional range of about 70 miles. That's exact same battery pack, exact same configuration. The next year after that, switched to a 30 kilowatt hour battery pack, which is about a 90-mile range. Then a couple years after that, the exact same battery pack had a 40 kilowatt hour battery pack, which has an estimated range of 150 miles. So the cool thing that we have here, in this we imagine could be a model that we'll see with other vehicles as well, is that if you found an old used Nissan Leaf and it had a completely shot battery, you could take it to this shop in Portland called EV Rides, and they can swap out the battery for a 70-mile range battery, and that's a $2,500 swap. 90-mile range battery is a $4,000 swap, and then a 150-mile range battery is a $6,000 swap. So they have options there if they're able to do that, which is something that we'll see more of in the future, but it's really great that we have a resource like that in Oregon. So what do they cost to buy? That's often the next question. And my first answer is that new cars in general are very expensive. In the last year, the average new car sold in the United States was upwards almost $40,000, which is crazy. But what we know from doing a lot of digging in on these cars is that, you know, the total cost of ownership might be less. The total cost of ownership for even like a Tesla Model 3 is less expensive than a Toyota Camry over 5 years. But most folks aren't pulling out their spreadsheets before car shopping. So this is where we can come in and try to help make sure that we're looking at apples to apples. And one, if you're interested in a new vehicle. And so this is kind of a little bit of a chart of what that looks like, and we'll point towards more research in the at the end as well. But especially if you're looking at new vehicles and are curious about incentives, there's a website called Plugstar, and that's a good resource for shopping there. And they'll make sure to include the incentives because a lot of folks forget to subtract or don't know which incentives are applicable. We'll get to incentives in a little bit. The next place that a lot of folks are finally able to take advantage of are used options. We've had modern era electric cars on the road for nearly a decade, and that means that we're starting to see more and more used options out there. Fun little tidbit that I've learned, not being that much of a car guy, but working in this electric transportation space, is that once a car starts selling some significant volume, which sometimes is the first year, but sometimes takes a year to get production ramped up, you can usually expect used vehicles to start coming onto the market about 3 years later, because that's when a lot of leases come up. And that's when you get a lot of the used cars, kind of an influx of used cars in the market. So there's a lot of used cars on the market, and the used car market right now is pretty hot. So they're a little bit more expensive than they were when I gave this presentation last year. But we'll dive into where you can find some of those things. For folks that are interested in used electric vehicles, oftentimes you're going to have questions that if you're buying from a dealership, they might not know the answers to. So this is one really good resource that we definitely participate with a lot, and it's called the Bend Electric Vehicle Club. It's a Facebook group. If you don't have Facebook, you can reach out to me and I can reach out to the group. But this is a group of EV drivers that are very happy to answer whatever questions you might have. So some examples of things that I've seen on there are, I am really curious about the Volkswagen e-Golf. Does anybody have one in town and would be willing to let me take it on a test drive? That person was able to go do that drive, and then they were a little bit more confident when they went in to go purchase the car that it was worth the trip to Portland to go pick up that car. Other people will say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this drive out to Eastern Oregon, and I drive Kia Niro EV. Has anybody done that drive, or do you know how the Burns charger works? So those are a couple of examples on there, and if you're curious or deciding between a couple cars, it's a really active group and a good place to connect with. Let's see. People also reach out to me, and I'm happy to help kind of narrow down the options that are out there. So one of the things that's challenging is that if you're interested in an electric car, sometimes it's harder to find what's out there. So one of the first places that I tell people to look for if you're interested in an electric car is to just get a general idea of what's available and what the rough pricing would be. Is this company in Milwaukee outside of Portland called Platt EcoCar. They've been around for a while. They started just selling hybrids. Then they started selling hybrids, the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid. And now they're selling just all electric cars. It's really fun to go visit. You can go to one spot and they'll have 20 to 30 electric vehicles just out on the lot that you can go test drive. And so this is a really good spot to look because it gives you an idea of what's available on the market right now. So you can look on here and see that they've got cars, kind of most of their cars are between 2017 to 2021s. They have them in different mileage and from different manufacturers. Looks like they have a lot of Fiats and Chevys. They're also really good experts on the used market. And so if you're interested in a car and it's not there, you can call them and they'll know what's going on in the market of why it's not showing up. So they might know, oh, well, the manufacturer is put a hold out on all of the lease returns, and so we're expecting that to be done in a couple of months. They're really experts on the market, so they can be really good spot to check. Another good resource is called EV Rides LLC. Those are the folks that are changing out those battery packs, and they're actually doing a lot with that, where they'll buy used leafs, and then when you buy it from them, you can just pick which size battery you want, and they'll give you a price out the door for what that's going to look like. So that's a little bit of a starting point of where to look. I know this is a lot, so keep those questions. You can either enter them into the chat now or write them down, so then they'll be ready for later. We're going to jump right next into incentives. And so the long story short, we're going to go into the weeds, but long story short is that you could get, depending on what you qualify, up to $12,500 off a new electric car, or between $2,500 and $5,000 off a new EV if you qualify for the income qualified program, and is a mix of state and local incentives. So we'll go ahead and dive in. So the first question, a lot of people have heard different things about the federal tax credit, and it's really hard to keep up to date on where this is at. So the long story short is that the federal tax credit was passed a number of years ago, and it is based on battery size and is up to $7,500 off as a tax credit in the year that you buy the car. And it phases out after a manufacturer reaches 200,000 sales of an electric car. So right now, that means Tesla and General Motors have reached the end of that cap. So if you wanted to purchase a new electric vehicle from one of those two manufacturers, this wouldn't be in play. But for everybody else, it still is in play. And there are federal tax credits in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that would expand on these and be available for all manufacturers and of a higher amount, but that we're still going to have to wait and see where that happens. We'll be sure to, once we have a final bill or a passed bill, we will make sure to communicate that out to everybody. So that's the federal tax credit. And if you don't have a high enough tax liability, there are ways to still be able to take advantage of it, which is what we did at the Environmental Center, because we don't have federal tax liability. So what we did is we leased the vehicle from Nissan, and then Nissan took the tax break, and then they discounted the price of the car by $7,500. So it essentially worked out like we got the $7,500 discount, it just went on somebody else's tax sheet. So the other program, which is also in flux, is the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate Program. This is a really great rebate program that was designed, in my mind, really trying to improve on other incentive programs that are out there. And it is to help encourage Oregonians to go electric and provide electric vehicles to make them more accessible for a broader population. So this is a little bit of the overview of what this program looks like right now. And then I'll have a little bit of an update at the end. So it's hard to talk about things that are in flux, but we'll talk about what's available right now. So right now there's two main components. The first one is a standard rebate. And this is up to $2,500 off of the purchase or lease of a new electric vehicle. And then there's a second rebate, and this is an income qualified rebate, which I'll get to a little bit later what those income limits are. And this one's available to either the purchase or lease of a new or used electric vehicle. So how that ends up working out is if you qualify for both of these, and you wanted to purchase a new electric vehicle, qualifying electric vehicle, then you would be able to get a $5,000 check from the state of Oregon. If you wanted to purchase a used electric vehicle, standard rebate doesn't apply, but if you qualify for Charge Ahead, you'd be able to apply that $2,500 off of the price of a used electric vehicle. Go into a couple of different components. So standard rebate, who qualifies? Oregon residences, businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies. All new battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles qualify under a certain price threshold. And most of the time, if you're buying an all-electric car, it's going to be $2,500. If it has a smaller plug-in hybrid type battery, then you might be getting $1,500. And then electric motorcycles get $750. The Charge Ahead is that income qualified one, and it is $2,500 off of new or used. These are some of the rules about the standard rebate. I'm happy to go over these in detail, but yeah, if you have specific questions, we can kind of come back to this. And then for Charge Ahead, it's also pretty similar, and there's a tool on the website to be able to determine your income eligibility. This is me pulling these numbers in 2019, so these income thresholds would be a little bit higher now. And this is an example for folks in anybody in Bend, Redmond, Madras, and Lapine. These would be the numbers that qualify, but you'll want to make sure to go onto the website to check, to confirm for sure what those income thresholds would be like for where you live if you're outside of those areas. So what that would mean is if you lived in Bend, or Redmond or Madras or Lapine, and you made, as a family of four, made less than $92,000, $92,400, then you would qualify for the standard rebate and the Charge Ahead rebate. I'm going to kind of boogie through these other pieces. Businesses, nonprofits, and governments also qualify for these. You just have to submit your usage data to DEQ for 3 years. Battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids qualify. This is just a good example of what some of those vehicles look like. Plug-in hybrid vehicles are vehicles that are electric part of the time, and then once they run out of their, once they work through their battery, then they switch into being a hybrid like the Prius. So an example of this is the Toyota Prius Prime. This is the Subaru Crosstrek plug-in hybrid. And then they do this based on battery size. So all electric vehicles like the Nissan Leaf Plus, which is pictured right here, which gets 250-ish miles of range, that qualifies for the $2,500 rebate. And this is another example. This is a plug-in hybrid, but it has a large enough battery that it actually qualifies for the full incentive. So that list is available on the website. So you can check for the car that you're interested, what's going to qualify and what's not. A couple vehicles that aren't eligible. This is an image of a Tesla Model Y, and this is a Volvo XC40, I think. So any vehicles that have a base MSRP of greater than $50,000 are not eligible for the rebate. So that's going to eliminate a lot of the luxury brands, except for the Tesla Model 3. It qualifies, but other luxury EV and plug-in hybrid vehicles are great cars, just not eligible for the rebate to make it more accessible. Electric motorcycles, there's a list of eligible motorcycles on there. If you're interested in a car that's new and isn't on the list yet, make sure to check in with me and with the state, because we want to make sure it's added to the list before you purchase, so you don't get stuck in regulatory limbo, which has happened. So you have to make sure you submit your rebate application within 6 months of the date of purchase. And again, this is a rebate check, not a tax credit. So it's going to happen outside of, if you don't wait until tax season, you submit it as soon as you purchase the vehicle. One other note on used vehicles is that it has to be purchased from a dealership. That's one of the stipulations on the state rebate. So yeah, that's an important note. There is one other important thing to know, is that there are some dealerships that participate in a program called Cash on the Hood. And what this means is that standard rebate is available right when you buy the car. So you do the paperwork while you're there, they pass on the discount to you, and then they'll take the money on the back end. You can check out this list to see which ones are eligible, but it's always good to ask, if you're purchasing a new vehicle, do you guys participate in the state rebate program? And if they don't, tell them that that's really important to you and that other dealerships are doing that. And if they have questions, they can reach out to DEQ or they can reach out to myself, and I'd be happy to get them enrolled. I've helped a number of dealerships in Central Oregon get enrolled in that program. Okay. So additional questions, if they're specific about the rebate, you can contact Oregon CVRP, that's Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, at energycenter.org. You can reach out to myself. But we're going to, yeah, so really the kind of general message is that electric cars drive much like traditional cars. The pedals, the steering wheel, and the controls are all the same. The dashboard includes a speed and mileage like a traditional car, and a range monitor tells you how much or how far you can drive before needing a new charge. They just provide more reliability and value. So we're going to jump into a couple of other incentives that are often available. So sometimes there are incentives available from electric utilities, either on the purchase of a car, on the purchase of a charging station, or some sort of special rate for charging or time of use charging. So it's always good to reach out to your electric utility. I know that Pacific Power is working on a residential charging incentive that got regulatory approval and should be coming out soon. There's also a federal charging incentive that is always in flux. It's a 30% tax credit. Make sure to reach out to me if you're curious about that, so then I can double check those numbers for you for this year. There are also often dealer discounts. So this is super variable and based on a whole bunch of decisions that a corporation might make in trying to increase sales one quarter versus another. So it's always good to check and see what discounts are available. If you're an overachiever and really want to get the most benefit out of your affordable EV purchase, a lot of EV drivers are looking at solar as a good opportunity to drive with sunshine and save even more. The yeah, and there's also other incentives for solar with there's a lot of incentives for solar as well. So these can pair really well together, looking long term. So let's see. I think that is it for the main slide. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and I saw a number of comments came through in the chat. So if you have a question, feel free to ask it in the chat, or if you are if you're bold and want to either raise your hand or unmute yourself, we can definitely take questions there as well. So I have first question that I got in was, we had an electric vehicle, a Leaf, until 3 weeks ago when it's totaled. Was a 2-car household, now only one, looking to buy another EV. And there's a question about the federal tax credit for Tesla. So this and all times in the last 5 years has been a very confusing time to know exactly what's up with all the different tax credits, because they're always changing. Or you'll hear about a proposal, but it hasn't been implemented yet. So there's a lot that's been in the news about federal tax credits, because the bipartisan infrastructure bill has had a lot of incentives talking about electric transportation, electric cars, electric buses. There's even an incentive in there for electric bikes, which I'm really excited about. And it's through that proposal that there's an expected federal tax credit that would be reinstated for all manufacturers, and would just take a new calculation in the future that's based on percentage of the, if final assembly happens in the United States, if it's done by a union, there's a whole new calculation. But I've also had some other folks reach out, curious about whether that credit could be applied retroactively. And this is entering into the speculation zone. So I'm going to go ahead and warn you all that I am guessing in my response to anything about speculations on future things. What I've found is that there usually is a date that once they make a decision and once something gets finally adopted in rules, they will establish a date at that point that may be the day that decision was created. It may be back at the beginning of a tax year. But if it was me, and I was really counting on one of those incentives, I would be pretty confident. I would want to be pretty confident, because I've seen somebody that didn't follow the advice of waiting. It had been passed in the state for a new incentive, but then not gone through rules yet. And so they weren't able to get it because it had gone retroactively like a week before they purchased it. So that was a little bit of a bummer. The one other exciting piece there as well is that the state did just increase that charge ahead rebate to $5,000. So if you're interested, if you're income qualified and interested in purchasing either a new or used vehicle that that's applicable for the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, that $2,500 would double. And I'm working on that rulemaking advisory committee, so I should know as soon as we know when that's going to be backdated to. But I know that is the intent of that, is to have those rules adopted by November or December. So that's an idea there. We have a couple questions about charging, and I realize normally I include a little bit of electric vehicle 101, including charging, because there's a lot of questions about charging often, but didn't include that in this presentation. So I'll give a little bit of a background. All electric vehicles, regardless of what you purchase, plug-in hybrid, all electric, new, old, they all have this. They all will come with a charger that comes in the car and can plug into a regular wall outlet. So at the base level, you'll always have that as a charging option. That charger can charge at about 4 miles per hour that it's plugged in. So what that means is that if you are parked overnight, you're talking about 40 or 50 miles of range with an overnight charge. And that often is enough for people's daily commuting. And then if you're going on a road trip, then you're kind of bumping up to different charging levels. So that's always one option. And that also can work in a rental if you don't have access to other charging options. A level 2 charger is the next charger up. And those are what some people will choose to install at their house. Those also are what you'll find at businesses that have charging, like the Environmental Center, like Pine Mountain Sports, a lot of hotels. And those chargers will get you about 20 to 25 miles of range per hour that you're plugged in. So where those kind of fill the need is, workplace charging or destination charging is a really important spot there. So if you have a car that gets 150 or 200 miles of range, you might be able to make it to Portland with no stops or with one brief, 10 or 15 minute stop to charge. But then when you leave to come back, you want to be starting with a full battery. So that's where level 2 charge is really important. Or folks that are driving more miles, especially back-to-back miles in town, they might choose to install a level 2. And the let's see, there's also other folks will choose to, especially with longer range cars. I know personally, a 200 plus mile range car, I would probably rarely need to charge, and might be able to charge. So some folks that have longer range cars and not that long of a commute will plug in at work once or twice a week, or there's DC fast chargers in town. So they might plan on, figuring out if they're driving 10 or 20 miles a day, then once a week or before a weekend, if they're planning a trip, just going and finding a public charger and plugging in for a little bit. We'll see probably more development of chargers being available for that, but the downtown Bend DC fast charger, which is by Journey Church and where Newport Avenue crosses over the river, that parking lot by Super Burrito, that is an affordable charging option for both level 2 and level 3. And then the next level of charging is called DC fast charging. And both of the ones that I talked about before will work for all vehicles. Works for all the regular EVs and also works for Teslas. The Teslas come with a little adapter to be able to plug into all those chargers. Once you get into DC fast chargers, these are like your road trip chargers primarily. And those chargers, there's a couple of different plugs, but there's really good tools to be able to just look at the ones that are going to work for your car. And that's what we'll use to be able to go on some longer drives and plug in there. And those also vary in speed pretty significantly, but generally speaking, they vary in speed a lot. So it kind of depends on the car and depends on the chargers that are available. But what I typically tell people to do there is if you do a regular road trip, say you have family in Portland or you have family in Medford or Seattle, at that point, reach out to me and we can map out what that route would look like with a couple of different electric cars. So, they'll vary a little bit in range, they'll vary a little bit in charging speed, what chargers are available, and we can look and see what that trip's going to look like, how much charging time you might expect to have in that on that trip. Would a plug-in hybrid like the Toyota RAV4 Prime get the federal tax credit? Yes, so plug-in hybrids are able to drive electric, 100% electric for part of the time. And so they are eligible for tax credits and rebates. It's just based on their battery size. You'll have to double check, but I think that the the RAV4 Prime has a large enough battery that in the current rules, it qualifies for the full rebate, both for the federal tax credit and for the state rebate. And Toyota still has those federal tax credits available. What does it cost to install a charge point at charge port at home. The chargers themselves cost anywhere between, I'd say, like $300 and $700 for a residential charger. Some of them have fancy tools. Some of them are portable, so you can bring it and charge at like an RV park if you're out on the road and traveling somewhere fun and rural. And if you want to install it at home, it's gonna be essentially your electrician running the equivalent of what wiring in a new electric dryer would be. So that's gonna vary a lot on where you're on kind of how you're set up at your house. So where are you gonna want to be plugged in to charge? How far away that is from your electric panel, and if your electric panel has capacity for it. So that can either vary from being prohibitively expensive or being something that, if you have an electrician already there, might only take them about an hour of their time. So it varies a lot, but I've seen the cost of the unit and then the install costs vary from a couple $100 to like maybe $1,500 to have that installed, just depending on where you want it, or maybe you might be able to find a spot that's a little bit more convenient and less expensive for the electrician to install. And Brian was able to look on the Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate site and saw that Tesla Model 3 and Model Y qualified for 2021. So that is likely, that doesn't surprise me. So the Model 3, that the way that they set up the rebate is that in order to qualify, your base price car has to be less than $50,000. And then if you have options and that car goes above $50,000, then it still is eligible because it's a little bit harder to regulate. And so it looks like, if Brian saw it on there, that the base price Tesla Model Y probably got in under, probably was like $49,900, and so they were able to be eligible for the credit. So good eyes there on that one. All right. Whew. That was like 50 minutes of me talking straight. I haven't socialized that much on a computer screen for quite a while during COVID. So we will, if anybody else has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. And if we are wrapped up on questions, maybe Peter has a question.
Hey, yeah, Neil, I did post this question. Maybe you jumped over it, or maybe you answered it. But okay. We park our car on the curb. We don't have a garage, so and I haven't bought an electric or hybrid yet. But I'm thinking it's going to be difficult to, short of running an extension cord across the sidewalk, to charge. And so I'm just kind of leaning towards hybrid as maybe making more sense. But I haven't really given it a whole bunch of thought. Do you have any thoughts on that if you were in that situation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's something that a lot of other areas have had to experience much more acutely than we have in Central Oregon, just based on the housing and kind of development in different cities. And so I'll tell you unofficially that I've seen people do what you mentioned of running an extension cord kind of like up through the trees over the sidewalk, and that's definitely not allowed, but people definitely do it. The other thing that I've actually started to see, and this is something that I think will hopefully work through with the city, is recognizing that that is a barrier and a resource, and trying to figure out, if people are doing it anyways, is there a safe way of making that happen? So we call that right-of-way charging. And we've seen a couple of other progressive cities actually adopt standards of saying you can do that, presuming that you use the right ramp to make sure that the charger cable that's going over the sidewalk is still ADA accessible. So I've seen Seattle actually establish standards on saying, yeah, you can use a rated extension cord and a rated charger, use a ramp that has, those little extension cord covers where there's a channel in the middle and then the little, thing to go over them. So that's something we haven't adopted here in Bend, but I think is an important thing to consider going forward as we want to make sure that we don't mess up accessibility, mess with fire standards, but also make sure that there's charging options for folks. And that would just be for 120 regular wall outlet charging. 220 charging, you might have to start relying on more public chargers at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. I had a fun little Easter egg in the question that we had for what does an average American pay for gas in a single year. $360 is what you'd pay for an average electric vehicle driver. So that was that minimum number. $1,200 is what you would pay if you were driving a 40 mile per gallon car. And so those are just a couple of big pieces. And I think another piece that I didn't really get into, but wanted to make sure to point out, especially when you're looking at multiple vehicle households, is really just trying, what I really urge folks to do if you're in a multiple vehicle household is to take a minute and stop and think, if we had to or chose to get rid of both of the cars we have right now, what would be the ideal setup that we could have that would match as many of the needs as we can that involves an electric vehicle? And so that's going to differ for everybody. Everybody has different needs. And oftentimes every car is a little bit of a compromise. And so just taking a step back and thinking about that, you might be able to find the right combination of vehicles that works for you. And hopefully we can make this shift to electric a little bit faster. So it sounds like we're done with questions, which is great because we have another staff member hopping on for another presentation at 6. If you have additional questions or want to take a minute to set up a quick Zoom meeting with me, I'm happy to dive in and help look at cars. I've had people say, hey, I'm really interested in this car. I regularly travel to Seattle. What would that road trip look like in a Chevy Bolt versus a Nissan Leaf Plus? And so we could look at that and figure out what the charging times would be. Or, hey, I really regularly take this drive. Is that possible as well? So feel free to reach out, and then we'll send some, since you all registered for this, we'll send some follow-up resources both to this group and then also to we'll post a blog post about it next week, because next week is National Drive Electric Week. So if you follow us on Instagram, we will have a whole series of little electric vehicle explainers on there as well. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you in person at an electric vehicle ride and drive, hopefully sometime soon.